Happy Wednesday, and what a Wednesday this has been. Hey, I'm looking out the window here. The sun is out, the sky is blue. I hope the sun is out and the sky is blue is where you're at too. But hey, just in case you've stumbled across here and you're wondering what you're watching, hey, it's time for the Imperfect Action live stream. It's been a couple weeks since I've been last on here. I've had a lot go on. I've had to deal with the hurricane, got to celebrate my 33rd wedding anniversary. But hey, here we are nonetheless. Who am I? I am Rob Fenstermaker, former corporate burnout survivor turned kingdom builder, your kingdom builder. Hey, what I want to do is I want to get you out of the rut. I want you to start living the life you were called to live. I want you to be intentional about what it is and take action to become that person you have all been called to be. Hey, a couple things going on. Hey, this Friday, you never attended the virtual Friday whiskey hour. This Friday is your opportunity. The virtual doors open at 4:50 p.m. Eastern. We go live at 5. I'm actually taking this on the road. I think I'm going to be in Disney World. I'm going to do this one from Disney World of all places. So that's an event you really want to stop by and check out. You know, some people said, "Hey, I don't drink whiskey." There's no requirement to drink whiskey. What we do is have a great, fantastic, meaningful conversation, and it's a great opportunity to end your work week with some connections. Something else I got going on. Beyond the Provider, Redefining Manhood. This is a new group that I'm getting ready to launch after the new year. It's designed for men. Why do I design it for men? Because men need to be in community with one another. Men holding other men accountable. There's something powerful about that. There's something powerful when a man knows there's other men holding him accountable and he does the same. That's what I define. That's what I'm really looking for this to become, is that way for men to share life together. And there's something powerful about that when men do that. But enough about that. Hey, it's time for the Imperfect Action live stream. It's time for me to introduce my guest. Emin Muhammad owns Kobe which is a short-term rental company where he helps his clients to transform their rental property. He's also a host of the Transform Your Rental Property Summit coming up this February. Iman, thank you for stopping by the Imperfect Action live stream. Hey, what is imperfectly going on in your world today?
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me. I want to start off with that. And that introduction was crazy. I love it. Love it. You got to teach me how to do that.
Did you? You know what? You just take a deep breath and let it rip. That's how you do it. Just take a deep breath and let it rip.
Hi, everyone. As Rob mentioned, I'm Imam Muhammad, Kobe Coco Vacation and Short-Term Rentals. And like he said, I help landlords, not only landlords, property managers, real estate professionals, and also real estate investors. We teach them how to transform their rental property. And you don't have to be a current landlord. You can be an aspiring landlord. So we teach you how to get there. And as far as imperfect action, I like that idea. In fact, I started with imperfect actions, but I have a formula to help you perfect those actions and make it as perfect as possible. So we'll talk about some of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, you know why I call it imperfect actually? Because I've just seen too many people, they wait around. Hey, I just need the perfect time to do something. I need the perfect time to do whatever it is. And they wait and they wait and they wait and they wait and they never do anything. I say just take the imperfect action. Just do it. If something is wrestling with you, just do it. Just take that step and find out what happens. You know, you discover a lot about yourself when you take that imperfect action. You discover, hey, maybe I'm pretty good at this, or maybe this isn't really what I needed to do, or maybe I need to refine something. But without taking that action, you're never going to learn anything. That's why I call it imperfect action. And I've always believed, I'm a big proponent of Dave Ramsey. And one of Dave Ramsey's big things is the way to build financial wealth is through real estate. That's how he built his empire, is through real estate. And he's right. Real estate is the way to build, your financial empire. And as people go through that process of, they have their main residence and maybe they decide, hey, I want to purchase this thing and create that rental space for whatever it may be, a long-term rental, a short-term rental. What are some of the biggest pitfalls you've seen people get into when they're trying to really get into that space of trying to create that rental property?
Oh, man. What I find more often is they're not. Is really doing the analysis behind what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And one of the pitfalls you're going to fall into if you don't take those processes and those procedures that you might have, and this is more of a perfect action if you have a plan in place. But I really think
Yeah.
you should do it imperfect just to get up and running, like Rob mentioned. You don't want to be like, and I've been so guilty of just prolonging because my background, for those of you who don't know, is I developed software my entire career. So from college, I
Yeah.
received a scholarship, I was a ball player, and I graduated with both business and technology degree. And with
Yeah.
that said, we always had structure, we always had framework. And so I like the framework that I'm going to talk about today. And within that framework, do all those imperfected steps, you know. And so some of the
Hmm.
pitfalls to get back to your question is you don't screen your guests. And if you're in a long-term space, you might be familiar with that. You don't do that background check like you should on a
Yeah.
potential tenant. And next thing you know, you're in the eviction courts. And so that's
Yeah.
one. Another big pitfall is, are you tracking revenues? You know, and
Mm.
how do you check? You just, I mean, you might have $1,000 a month for rent, so it's pretty easy to track. But do you have a
Right.
system to track that? And why are you
Yeah.
only receiving $1,000 a month? So we're going to talk about transformation and getting that dollar amount.
Okay. All right. So I'm let's just kind of I'm somebody here. Let's say I got my primary residence, and I decide, hey, I want to get into the rental business. I want to start renting out properties. And should I be looking at a property, buying it low that maybe needs some work, or would it be best to just buy it turnkey? What would you recommend in a situation like that?
It's, you know, if you know, real estate is very regionalized. So it depends
Right.
on where you are. If you're in Boca Raton, you're probably not going to find too many inexpensive places. So you might want to go to the closest town next to Boca Raton where the price will be lower. Because one thing you do with short-term rentals, one thing you will experience is the revenue is on average 2 to 3 times higher than your nightly long-term rent. And
Mm,
so how do you get the best opportunity as far as paying your, not only paying your mortgage, breaking even, but making a
yeah.
profit? So it really comes down to analysis. And I'm going to talk about some of the steps we do in order to help you with your analyze, because once you have the data and you analyze, you'll be able to make better informed decisions.
Yeah.
So tough question.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned a place like Boca Raton. So, I mean, obviously, if you're near the beach, that's a prime opportunity to create that short-term rental. But there's other ways as well. Let's just say, I mean, you're in the Boston area, and I originally lived in Columbus, Ohio area. So you got a lot of sport opportunities. You've got the different events. Like in Columbus, you had the Ohio State football, Ohio State Buckeyes. And I've gone up there for games, and we've looked for those Airbnbs for those short-term rental. So just because you're maybe not necessarily in, let's quote, the vacation land, there's always an opportunity to rent out your property. But you got to look at what the local economy is going to provide. Are there conventions coming into town? Are there sporting opportunities? So there's always an opportunity to create an income if you're intentional about
Absolutely. And that's such a good point. One of the things you have to, and I talked about analysis earlier, is, you know, what is your target market? You know, based on data information, you see, oh, I got an arena next to, a couple of miles away, or I have the art center downtown, or I'm in the middle of the country. Regardless of
it.
what you have to promote, you have to get that information down on that initial step, build out all your
Yeah.
requirements, set that baseline. And then, yeah, you might have people coming in for work. You discovered, hey, I got a lot of companies around, so you need corporate
Hmm.
housing. Um,
Yeah.
Vacation, obviously, vacation for vacationers, but you could also have
Yeah.
problems with, people in the area who had problems with their home, maybe a fire, and you
Mhm.
might have a partnership with the insurance company for temporary
Okay.
placement. I mean, the point is, short-term rentals are really furnished properties. It's furnished.
Yeah.
So you can put
Right.
any kind of label on it you want. It's furnished housing. And when I started, I in my career early on, I was going out to these different states to build out systems, software. So we would go to Colorado, for example, and stay for 6 months or longer. We always needed furnished housing, and this is before the Airbnb time. So we
Yeah.
were corporate apartments, so you can make you a corporate apartment. The point is, it's short-term housing and it's furnished.
Yeah. And I've heard the horror stories of Airbnbs where you get somebody in there and they just don't get out. You see these every now and then, but um, if you're putting your property on a platform like Airbnb or VRBO, they're also going to help you out too. Is that correct? Or do you just kind of, is it just the wild, wild west out there? How does that work?
So interesting. Again, in the areas you have to just consider is, and this is during that initial stage of analysis and really putting all that information down. Is one of the things you're going to notice is you have a policy area that you need to really hone in on. What are the policies? It could be state policies and rules and regulation. It could be municipality level. And it also could be if you're in a community, condo community, what are the bylaws? And so with that said, you also need policies in place for if you're going to put it on a platform like Airbnb or HomeAway. What are their policies? They do help you, but from my experience, they help you. Their help is more geared towards the guest, not so much the landlord, the homeowner. So that's why it's so important to make sure you have your policies in place. As far as people staying over their stay, I have never experienced that, and I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been doing
Yeah.
short-term rental. I was doing Airbnbs before Airbnb. It was always a side until in recent years. It was always a side gig or a moonlighting venture. But I've been doing short-term rentals for a very long time. I've never had that experience, and you have to be careful. If oftentimes if you have a guest in there for 7 days or 10 days, oftentimes you have another guest coming in. So if they try to stay,
Yeah.
you don't really have to worry too much about that. I have never experienced in 20 years. But you
And then when it,
might run into that situation if you have a guest for 30, 60, and 90 days, and then that's where you really know you need to know what the policy is in that municipality, that state, where they become an actual tenant. And so you need to be aware of all that.
So when it comes down to liability, so do these platforms, like say something happens, you have a guest in there and whatever, they slip and fall, and they say, I'm going to sue the owner. There was something wrong with that tile that caused me to trip and fall and break my arm. Are you kind of on your own? Does your personal insurance come in? Do these platforms come in to help you with any liability issues, or do you need some type of coverage through your own insurance company to cover something like that?
Yeah, again, all that will be built out during your design and implementation piece, but it'll be based on some of the requirements that you outlined in the step one, which is analysis, and we'll talk about that in a few. You first of all, in early days of Airbnb or short-term rentals, if you think about HomeAway and Airbnb, TripAdvisor at the beginning, they didn't have insurance for their customers, their landlords. Now they have $1 million, and a lot of these policies and rules and regulations at the state level where you need $1 million policy. So most homeowners will be provided with $1 million policy, whether it's through the platform, but I recommend that each homeowner has his own policy, and there's ways you can do that where you can kill two birds with one stone. You can have homeowners insurance, and you can have that type of coverage under one umbrella insurance.
So someone comes to you and they say, "Hey, I've got this condo here I bought, and it's just kind of sitting vacant right now. I know there's an opportunity for me to rent it out for a week or two at a time. Walk me through the process."
Well, the first question I would ask is, what's going on with it? Give me the specs on it. Is it a one bedroom? Is it two bedroom? Has it been sitting? Have you ever rented it? If you did, has it been long term? Did you ever try short term? I would get as much information, because without the data, without the information, it's be tough for me to make a call. And part of that is, where area is it in? Is it it doesn't have to always be a prime area. It could be, you'd be surprised some of the best or most successful homes are located in the middle of nowhere. But the biggest point when you talk about a condo is, what are those bylaws like? What are those bylaws? So that'd be part of that analysis phase, and getting the data on paper, and then strategizing based on that initial step. So that's the first thing I would ask my landlord, my potential client, is what's going on with the property.
And as you say, transform this property, it needs to be made in such a way that it's I'm assuming friendly for the renter. It's going to be furnished. You're going to have a bed, furniture, whatever. Um, is there a level of furnishing that really needs to be required beyond just a bed? What would you encourage them to have in there? And the reason I'm going to ask that, I remember back in the day when I was in college and I went on spring break, and like idiot college students we are, we rented a place near the beach, and all that were in there were a couple beds. That was it. But when you're college age kids and all you need is beer and a bed and a place to take a shower, that's about it. That's all you need. But if I'm somebody that I'm coming in town for some big event and I walk in and there's just a bed, I'm going to be a little ticked off. Um, but what's the expectations of what somebody would really need to have that furnished?
Well, it depends on what is the results of that analysis, you know. So if your
Yeah,
target market is college age kids, that's your target. Was we figured that out. You don't have to
yeah,
have much but the essentials. Make sure you have some TP and maybe soap, because they're not going to go out and buy soap and a couple of blow up beds, and you'll be fine. However,
yeah.
depending on what you decide your target market is, you have to design your home around that target market. So if it's a corporate
Okay,
space, make sure you have a desk, a printer, certain things. So it really depends. It's a tough question to answer. It's not tough if you know what the target market is and who your service and who your guests are going to be. But based on,
okay,
but one thing is equal. I mean, one thing's common between all different targets. You need TP, you need soap, and everything else is negotiable.
yeah. Okay. All right. Um, well, very cool. Yeah, you say that. I when I travel, unless I'm staying at a hotel, I always bring my own shampoo, my own soap. Yeah, it's nice to have it in there.
We love you.
Um, but I just bring it because I know the soap I like, I know the shampoo I like. But yeah, I did. But yeah.
Well,
Um,
the biggest thing is you
okay.
have to be as transparent as possible. You have to be transparent. This is what the house, this is what we provide. Like in some of our homes, we can host larger groups. Some of our homes we can house 20 people. And so we will provide a starter, and we will disclose, hey, we got starter TP for you, starter soap. However, if you go
Yeah.
beyond what we supply, just make sure you're aware that you need to go to the shopping store, which is around
Yeah.
the corner.
Okay. So as I transform this, I mean, what are some things you really, and you kind of mentioned it, but as you're working with your clients to really transform, this rental property, what are some of the things that you really want them to focus on beyond just the furnishings? Um, and I know one thing that's always important when I go to these websites, I want to see the pictures. And some of them, the pictures are there, but I also want to see the pictures of outside. Hey, what's around? Am I next to a park, or am I next to a landfill? And they kind of give me those pictures on the outside. Um, I think that's a very important when somebody's going to rent. Now, granted, the reviews will indicate that if it's next to a landfill or next to a railroad track, I'm sure the reviews would say that. But I think the pictures need to be an accurate reflection of what I'm actually renting.
Right, absolutely. Well, transformation comes in many forms. If you think about some of the business districts in maybe your area in New York City, I can talk about um, a lot of these companies, these buildings, these office spaces are no longer viable because people are working from home.
Right.
It's so commonplace nowadays. And so you may want to transform an office building to a residential. So you may not have a kitchen in there, or you may have a half bath. And again, this will all come out during that first phase. I got a half bath. I know I need to get a full bath. So you need to do that in the design area. You design well, I'm gonna put the bathtub here, or a stand up shower. That's an example of an extreme case of transformation. A lot of folks in New York, a lot of companies in New York City or landlords in New York City are transforming their business commercial property to residential. And so that really
Okay.
takes a lot of where we are, where we need to be, what type of policy, rules, and regulations. It's all kind of things you need to think
Right.
about. But that's an extreme example of transformation from commercial to
Wouldn't there,
residential.
wouldn't there wouldn't there be wouldn't there be zoning issues with that if you're zoned for commercial retail and all of a sudden it's residential? Doesn't that create zoning issues?
Exactly. That's why that first step is so important. You have to go to City
Okay.
Hall and see what the rules and
Yeah.
regulations are. And a lot of these municipalities are incorporating, hey, we realize the business districts are hurting, so we're going to make this a dual zoning area where you can have both residential and commercial. I think they did it in Manhattan, if I'm not mistaken. And so a less transformation example, less of an effort is from a long term to short term. One of my homeowners, he had a family member in his home, and beautiful little cottage, lakefront. He had his family member in there, his niece, and man, she had pets, all kind of pets. They would never clean the house. I mean, family
Yeah.
members not paying their rent. It just were a nuisance, even though they were family members. I walked
Right.
in because we were about to go to the transformation process, and I needed obviously that first step. So let me go see what he's working with. And so I went inside and I took all kind of notes, and I'm like, oh my God, he needs a lot in order to transform. And so, based on what he had and what he wanted to do, he wanted to double his rental income. He wanted to have a freedom to go to that house when he wanted, because he was living in the middle America, out by Pittsburgh area, and he would want to come back to Massachusetts and visit his lakefront, but he always had somebody in the house. So he wanted to have flexibility to enjoy his property when he wanted, not only the return on investment, and he also wanted to clean. The house was a mess. The house was a mess. And you have a short-term rental, it needs to be guest ready. So it's always clean.
Right.
It's cleaner than your
Right.
your own house. So it's really a pleasant experience when you have a short-term rental. So it took, how do we get it to where he's going to be doubling his rental income from zero to something? It's not a very huge undertaking, because she wasn't paying for a very long time. And how do you have access to your house? And when you go there, you have furniture. And so based on that transformation, we went through all the details. How do we get there? And so that's some of the things we talk about we have an upcoming,
I'm assuming he had to get her out of that house.
that was all part of it. It was a court, with this transformation, it was a court process that was in place that we had to go through.
So do you work with having that conversation? You don't expect the
Yes.
owner. You will have that conversation. It's time to go. There's the door. Don't let it hit you in the butt.
Yes, we had to go to the courthouse. That was part of the transformation. But again, we wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known unless I did all that upfront work, what needed to be done, where you are, where you want to be, and what are the things we need to do in the middle to get it done.
Okay. And then, what are some of the success stories? I'm a renter. What are some of the successes I can experience if I decide I want to have a short-term rental property?
Oh, what a success. So this is what it would look like after a successful transformation. This is not an income claim, but I'm just going to use some real numbers from one of my properties. So one of the homes was making, about $35,000 a year in long-term rentals, making about 35. So that the rent was $3,000 a month or so. And so, which is a decent rent, 3,000. Who will take that for long term as a landlord? You would take it. You'll take it. The downside to that is they weren't always on time, so that was a little stress behind that. Another problem was there was no access to the house. So after a year and a half, 2 years, the landlord was able to get inside his house and had no idea it was such a mess. I mean, there was doors torn off the hinges. Got word from neighbors that they were a nuisance to the neighborhood. They had some teenagers that were kind of loud in the area. And so after transformation, that dollar amount went from $3,500 for the year, $35,000, sorry, for the year, 35,000 to 90,000. And so just that alone, and it was only rented 3/4 of the time. So you still had a ceiling where you could even make more than that $90,000. And so that's one of the advantages after transformation. Another advantage is you're able to visit the property whenever you want. So you might have somebody in there.
Right. Well, shouldn't that be in the contract? Because I mean, that should be part of the contract.
Definitely, yeah.
A landlord has access to the property every quarter, given 48-hour notice or whatever, 72-hour notice, whatever it may be. That should
Right.
be written in the contract, correct?
It's absolutely written in the contract. But as a landlord, how many times do you really do it? If you're really conscientious about your property, yeah, you will, and you have time, you will do it. But
Right.
oftentimes they're paying the rent, it's fine. The next thing you go in a year later, it's like, oh God, they've been paying their rent on time, but it's a mess. So
Yeah.
um, that was a huge problem with our landlords. And by the time they got back to the house, it was a 2-year lease, I think, for this particular property, and it needed to be remediated. Doors
Mhm.
were torn off the hinges. The sink was it was a mess. Ended up having to go to court because although they paid at the beginning, the last several months they did not pay, so it required
Yeah.
a court process. And so at the end of it, he had his house back. He was making double the rental income. And one of the things about this business is with traditional rentals, with long-term rentals, you don't have many options, many streams, revenue streams. You have the rent and that's it.
Right.
However, with
Yeah.
short-term rentals, the money streams are endless. There's so many ways you can make extra money. Not only rent, can have cleaning fees. You can have early check-in fees. You can have service providers that do your house, and there's so many ways you can earn extra money. You can have products in your house. It's so many ways. But when you have a long-term traditional rental, you'll have that $3,000 a month rent, and that's it, and no flexibility. And if you try to raise your rent the following year, you got to know what the rules and regulations for your municipality is, because you may not be able to raise it, but so much
Yeah.
if you have rent control.
Yeah. And there's more and more places getting that control as far as limiting the percentage that you can. I don't know. New York City is famous for rent controls. There's people that have been living in apartments for 35 years where they're paying a pittance, where the person next to them is paying whatever, some exorbitant rate.
Right.
Um,
This is amazing. I was in the post office the other day, and I was a long line. I was talking to this woman in front of me. She was like, "Oh, I've been in my home for 22 years." And I said, "Oh." She said, "Yeah, and the landlord," started talking about the landlord. I'm like, "You and the landlord has been family for 22 years?" Imagine that landlord. I mean, you need long-term housing. I'm not saying anything
yeah.
about traditional rentals. This is society needs it. But man, as a landlord, you get to a point where, hey, I don't want to have someone in my home for 22 years. I want to be able to enjoy it because it's in a great area, or I want to make more
Yeah.
money and have flexibility. So that just when she
But,
told me 22 years, I'm
but
like,
usually, as long as they're paying the rent on time, you can't evict them.
you can't, right?
There's just no way to evict them. And I mean, that's just part of the deal. If you're going to be a landlord and you have a tenant that's paying their rent on whatever day you signify, the first of the month, and you get that check the first of every month, hey,
Right.
that's just part of the deal.
Right, right. And you don't need like something like technology to support you that much in that scenario. Short-term rentals, you really need technology to support you. So really, so you got to pick and choose if you're not techie, which is going to make the most sense for you.
Now, when you say you need technology to support you in the short term, and what kind of technology do you need? What's best if you're going to get into that space?
Well, right off the bat, Airbnb, that's a technology platform. You need to know how to
Mhm.
work that. You need to know how to operate it. But you know, Airbnb only
Mhm.
provides X amount of service. And so you're going to need a lot more. You're going to need fulfillment. You're going to need email. You might have reminders. What are the checkout instructions? Uh, Oftentimes you can build that stuff into your platform, but then you're handcuffed to Airbnb. Do you actually want to be handcuffed to Airbnb? So I always say those platforms are great, but you might want to offload that into your own database and run fulfillment on your side oftentimes or in conjunction. Could be really complicated unless you have training, you have coaching, and or you're a technical person anyway. But something like a CRM, because once a guest come into your property on this year, then you want to invite them next year. Airbnb is going to invite them next year, but they're not going to really push your property. They're going to just say, come back to some other location
Come back.
or. And so
Yeah.
technology is really, really. I can't stress how important technology is. If nothing else, you need a file system. You need a file system. So
Okay. All right. And then, okay, very, very cool. And I know you had some slides you wanted to share. as far. I'm gonna go ahead and bring these up because I know you had some information you wanted to share with that. Um, so take it away.
Yeah, I mentioned that first step a couple of times, and I'm going to really show you how it looks on paper via my slides here. And this talk is about you know, imperfection is great, and you should start off. But one of the things I like about the framework I'm about to show you is you can start with imperfection, but you could place it in this framework. I imperfectly started housing short-term tenants. I don't know what I'm doing, but I had my first, I made some money, and I put it on Airbnb, and I want to continue to improve. So that's what this is all about, continuous improvement. So
Yeah,
you start off imperfected, and then you continue to improve. And it's not going to be the best it can be overnight, you know. And so what's your plan to adopt, improve, and succeed? Because with continuous improvement, it can really revolutionize your real estate business and your life,
hmm,
and it's just planning. So with that said, this is for, we talked about landlords, homeowners, aspiring landlords, and you can have either one unit, you can have a house with just a separate entry or not. Or you could have some folks have a room in their home and they rent it out. That's not my favorite model, but it is possible.
yeah,
And for property managers and realtors, we talked about that earlier. So if you're a real estate investor, it's a great area to invest in. And I already talked about me, business and technology major, graduated from New York City. I was a ball player, so I received the athletic scholarship and really started went into tech right away. I started as a computer operator, all the way through programming, management, you know, every area of a system development lifecycle I participated or led. And so about 2015, 2016, I left corporate, and then I started my own company because while I was in corporate, I mentioned earlier, I would travel around to these different projects and I always needed furnished housing. And so my ex-wife and I ended up buying houses in some of those areas and starting renting them out the way everybody else does as a long-term renter. And then back in 2001, I read an article. It was in Money Magazine or Wall Street Journal, one of the financial periodicals. It's like, hey, it's this new kid on the block called Vacation Rental by Owner. And it was so funny because it was just a mom and pop operation. And back then, it wasn't real transaction based payments. So it was just a
yeah.
big advertisement. You put your home on Airbnb and say, hey, give me a call on this phone number and we'll mail me a check. And so that's when we first started. And then along the way, it became, you could start paying, and they're really sophisticated nowadays. But that's how we started 20 years ago, brick and mortar, almost like approach. What are some of the problems we talked about with long-term rentals? And we mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. Tenants are anchored to your house, you know, and I told you the other nightmare where the house needed to be remediated. They allowed the leak to
Right.
handle it and call it in. We didn't inspect it. And next thing you know, mold in the house and remediation. I also mentioned about the revenue. You can make a lot more money. You don't have to worry about late or non-payments because before they check in, they pay. So you
Hmm.
don't have any, rarely, if ever, have any problems with revenue and not paying because they don't get inside the house until it's fully paid. And then regulations. Regulations are really complex, and well, they can be for short term also. But if you have something like, hey, you can't raise your rent, that's a problem with regulation. So you can only be comfortable with what you make and just live with it. And if you're not paying breaking even with rent and maintenance, you're really caught out there. And
Yeah.
technology, that's a big advantage of short-term rentals. A lot of things you can put this on autopilot, where it won't be as much, because the difference between long-term and short-term, you're going to be doing a lot more work with short-term. So how do you streamline the operations where you're able to maximize your practice using technology? Let it take over. Like for example, you might have a workflow in the back end that when that person checks in, they get this email 10 days later after they check out. You can automate all of that. You can have your cleaners online where you don't even need to be involved. They make the booking, it goes out to where it needs to go on the system. The cleaners know it needs to be clean. guests know when they check out. The guests know when they check in. The guests know when they check out. So how do you position technology to help you run your
Yeah.
operation? And that'll allow for you, if you want to build out and build more properties and buy more properties, it'll give you a unfair advantage when you have technology supporting you.
Yeah.
And so I want to bring this. This is interesting. Interesting stat I recently discovered. And this is again starting off imperfect action just to get the ball rolling, but make sure eventually you have goals and plans in place. And then this is a study done by Harvard MBA study. Only 3% of all adults have clear written goals.
I
And that,
believe it. I believe it. I
and
believe it.
that same number, 10x, are more successful
Yeah.
than those without a plan.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. We make sure we go through the process. What are you working with? Because we want to be able to measure when it's all said and done. And that's the way you
Right.
do it, through planning. Um,
Okay.
and I always ask my landlords, my customers, my students, what type of mindset they are before we even get started. And some folks are mixed fixed mindset. I've been doing this for 30 years
Yeah.
and I've been doing great. Yeah, but how do you make it better? Has it gotten better? Are you able to measure? Are you better to look at your plan and say, hey, in 2000, when I started, 2000 and 2001, when we first started, we didn't have real-time transactions, payments in place.
Right.
And
Right.
we look at today, you say, okay, well, I did continue to improve over the years, yeah, but it's not written down. Who you leave it? Who do you leave it to? If you want to leave a legacy, if you want to create courses and documentation, it's just hearsay. You can't verify it. So it's really,
Mhm.
so are you a fixed mindset where you're like, I know everything, I don't need to grow? Are you a growth mindset, and are you a learning mindset? So I always ask my clients, and if you're a fixed mindset, we probably are not the best partner for
I can
you.
imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
If there's growth or learning, you're really. What are the foundations of continuous improvement? It's just a never-ending journey. And if you look at our program, we have a program called Short-Term Rental Mastery. We don't call it continuous improvement because it's a never-ending journey. Continuous denotes never ending. We have something called
Mhm.
continual improvement. So it's based on fixed amounts. So we might say, okay, for this 1 year or this quarter, um, this is what we're looking to achieve. This is where we're starting on day one of this year, and this is where we're going to end on day two, based on our continual improvement plan. So it's not really continuous every day beyond that 12-month period. You build out a new continual improve, and every day you continuously learn. But we have something called
Yeah.
continual because it's more fixed, we're more measurable, it's more controllable. Continuous, just go, go, go.
Yeah.
Continuous.
And
Anyway,
as far as finding, well, as far as finding the rate that they want to charge, is that I'm assuming you can provide them that information that this is what traditional rates are for this area, this time of the year, because I mean, time of the year is going to really impact in a lot of places. I know here down here in South Florida, time of the year is they're definitely going to impact because right now we're in what's called season. That's high rental time. If you want to rent a 4 month short term rental down here in South Florida at this time of the year, you're paying a premium. If you want to wait till May and just kind of rent through the summer, you're going to get it a lot less. But I'm assuming you help them with that data to come up with the right rate for the right time for right events.
Right. That's a great question, Rob. And it really goes back to our technology portion that we spoke about. We want to have tech in place for that because, I mean, I don't know. When I first began years ago, it's like in the Boston Marathon was coming to town. We had our regular rates up.
Mhm.
Not that
Yeah.
we knew Boston Marathon was coming up in 12 months or whatever, but we didn't change our rates yet because we figured we have time. These folks are booking a year ahead of time, so they got in and they get these cheap rates. But if you have technology in place to make sure it's your eyes for you, there's
Right.
there are many options, dynamic pricing, and really adjust your rates based on what's happening in the area,
Okay.
high season, low season. So yeah. So this is what I mentioned, I kept referring to earlier. We do that analysis first. This is the structure for property transformation. Really, we do the analysis first. Requirements are built out in this area, all the data. We capture as much data as we can, what's happening in the area, how much rent you're currently charging, what's the square footage of your home. We also talk about your personal health. Well, you know, some of the things you want to, because it's continuous improvement, is like health, wealth, and happiness, all um, really put into one pot. So, because let's say you are really obese, and you don't have flexibility to get around the house the way, and when you're in short-term rental, you need to be mobile, you need to be agile. You can still do it, but now you know that information. Not only so, you might say, okay, well, I need to get healthier. That's on a different track. You know, that's not an area that's beyond scope for us, but we do. But you may say, okay, because I'm out of shape, I need to make sure I have vendors in place, make sure I have resources in place because I know my health is not. That's why analysis is so important. And then we go into design. Based on that design, based on those requirements, you build a design out. You know, in the case of a commercial property, you know, you need to add a bathtub to make it a full bath and not a half bath. Bring it up to code. That's an example of some of the designs you need to put into place. Make sure what kind of bedding you want to have. You know, so based on your target market, which was done in, you know, you'll say, okay, my target based on all the data I have is business travelers, so corporate space. So we're going to build our house around, or our unit around corporate travel. And then once that design is in place, and this is what we do with software development, it's no different. If you look at Apple, they come out with V1, version 1 in the iPhone, and now there's version 1 or whoever. It's continuous improvement. So once you implement it, you build it out. Okay, you built that. You added that bathtub, and now it's a full bath. You added that queen size bed. It's furnished. It's implemented, and now you're housing. You're fulfilling reservations. You had your first booking. So did they get the email sequence? Did they get, here's your check-in information? Here's your, while you're here, here's the Wi-Fi information. You have that all sequenced out or workflowed out, or if you're doing it manually, that's fine also. That's all implementation. And how do you tracking your money? Are you tracking it in something like a QuickBooks, or are you doing it in Excel, or are you just looking at your bank statements? It's all based on your planning, and this is all part of it. So it's, and then how do you continuously improve, which I don't have on this diagram. You do all the results from that year in and said, okay, I made this amount of money. This is what was right. This is what was wrong. And let's go back up to analysis and like build our new design or our updated design based on what happened. And that's when the continuous improvement come into play. And that's how you get stuff as perfect as possible, and you graduate from the imperfection. But you got the ball rolling, and now you're like having massive success because you not only started, and now you're maximizing continuous improvement. Really, so just to get into analysis, we talked about this. You need to be data driven. What's the square footage? What's your blood pressure? What's your A1C? Everything, just diarrhea of the brain. Just get everything down, because you may need to consider it once you go through the design phase. So requirements. So we know, because we had to visit City Hall. We know that we need to make sure we register. So we know you have to register. And then after you had, okay, is this possible? Is it possible? Well, no, City Hall said you can't do it, or our condo association said we can't do it. That's your answer. It's not possible. So what do? You might want to sell your place and get a new place. But that's another story for another day. So once you discover it is, from your analysis phase, you discover it's good, you go into design. And, you know, create the optimal layout, you know, make sure you have, you know, your blueprints in place, your plan in place. That's all part of design. And in our program, we help our landlords do exactly that, this phase.
Okay.
And then finally, you go into implementation. You do development. You make sure you upload your photos into Airbnb if that's the chosen platform. If you create your own website, because you might have been technical, you have a technical family member, or you have people you could just hire on a dime. However, you develop your presentation to the world, and we'll just use Airbnb in this case, put it on Airbnb. So, and then you implement it. You start making sure your calendars are connected with the platform. So you might have a property on Airbnb and that same property on VRBO, and you don't want them to bump heads because somebody came in and booked on for these dates and you didn't have the implementation or the integration and you have a double booking, which is a
Yeah.
nightmare. Another story for another day.
Yes, I can imagine. I can imagine. I'd be pretty upset. I would be pretty. And, this happened with us with a hotel. I remember
Right.
one time in particular, my wife and I went to a hotel, and they like, well, they double booked a room, and we got a room. Granted, we they eventually they figured they worked with us, and then we got a room. But it was a little tricky. Someone dropped the ball and double booked the room we wanted. It was not necessarily the room we wanted; it was just the area we wanted in the hotel. But they worked with us and they got it taken care of. So
Awesome. Yeah, it happens a lot with airlines too. They bump you from a
yeah.
seat, double
Oh
book.
yeah. Yeah. I've had those opportunities where they overbook the flight. They do it intentionally. And they do it. And they offer you incentives. Yeah. And if I don't have to be back, at a certain time, I mean, some of those cash incentives, they get them cranked up. Sometimes they can get up to a couple $1,000. And you're like, okay.
Not fun.
I'll catch the next flight out. If you're going to give me $2,000, I'll catch the next flight out. I'll gladly do that.
Yeah,
I
that
don't
part.
have to be back. Yeah.
But they get cursed out. I mean, your double bookings are the worst. And what's the problem
Yeah.
with double bookings? Is anything can cause a double booking. I just talked about not having your tech in place, but a pipe could bust. So it's double booked with the vendor, the plumber. He needs to come in for 2 days to replace something. That's a double
Yeah.
booking. What's the category? Why is it double booked? And it could be for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But you try to mitigate as much as possible.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is some of the things we talked about continuous improvement, but we're not going to get into that. Price and optimization, we talked about. Feedback is really part of that loop I talked about when implementing. You had a guest come in, you may want feedback, and then you just improve based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for everybody who wants to take action now, if they're a landlord, if they're an aspiring landlord, you can get in touch with us. We have a free download, which is a really good download. It's called 10 Steps to Launching Your Short-Term Rental. And it really hold your hand and walk you through the steps you really need. And if you have any questions and you have any holes that you need to fill in, once you download our free guidebook, you'll be able to get in touch with me and ask specific questions that's more customized for you.
Yeah.
But that's it, Rob.
All right. So I mean, obviously you got the free download here, and I'm sure there's a lot of the information you just shared. But it's an opportunity if that's something you're really considering. You got to cover all the bases, and kind of going back to the double booking. I know I've seen Airbnb and VRBO. I've gone through both those sites, and you'll see a lot of times the same sites on the multiple platforms. So if I rent something on Airbnb and somebody's renting it on VRBO, you would think it would block out, but it's probably incumbent upon the owner. I just rented this on Airbnb. I need to block it over here on VRBO.
That's for the property manager. Yeah, that's for the property manager, the owner, the landlord. You need to make sure that tech is in place. You have the technology to make sure that sync is in place. And so that's really, really important. And like I said, there's so many ways you can experience a double booking. And how do you handle a double booking? Because it will happen because you don't know how. You may think you have all the holes covered. I have my calendar synced, for example, but a double booking came in through another way.
Okay. Well, I kind of popped up here your email and then the website if people want to go, and then obviously you got the free download if people want to go ahead and check on that and get that. And I know you got a webinar coming up, which is in February. If they go ahead and pick up that free download, they'll get all the information for that webinar.
No, I have a webinar coming up this weekend, Rob. Correct.
Well, this weekend. The webinar's this weekend.
For our summit.
The webinar's this weekend.
Transform Your Rental Property Summit is early next year.
Got it. But if they download that the 10 steps, they'll get all the information for the webinar this weekend and the summit coming up in February.
Absolutely.
Correct. All right. Well, we're kind of coming up on the time here in mind. And I appreciate, the information. I've learned a lot about property here in the last 50 minutes that I didn't know before we got in here. But I know that generating wealth, if that's what your goal is, real estate is the way to go. I absolutely believe that. I think it's always going to be the way to go. But having said that, is there any parting wisdom you would like to share before we put a nail in this one and call this one a day?
Rob, I just want to say, yes, start imperfect. Get that imperfect action in place. But in the back of your mind, knowing that this imperfect action will need to be, whatever you're doing, the process needs to be improved. And what is that formula for improving? It has to be tangible. It can't be, oh, I have it in my mind. You have to make sure you have that plan in place. Remember, 3% of all folks don't have a plan. And those who do have a plan are 10 times more likely to succeed than the others. So,
yeah. All right. Well, very cool. Hey, if you want to reach out to me, here's the best email to reach out to me. Go ahead and drop me a line. I will certainly get back with you. As I mentioned, this Friday, the Virtual Friday Whiskey Hour. Virtual doors open at 4:50 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be going live from Disney World. I don't know where I'll be in Disney World, but I'll be live from Disney World. We go live at 5. We'll have a conversation regardless. Beyond the Provider, Redefining Manhood will be launching after the new year. I don't have a specific date yet, but we will be launching this after the new year. Hey, if this is something that interests you, I would love to hear from you. Let's have that conversation because, it's time to really define what manhood is all about. Too many men have lost their way and have really lost their bearing on what it means to be a man. And I want to correct that. I want to correct that as a man because I think it's important. But enough about that. Hey, I appreciate everybody stopping by. I hope you got some value out of this. Hey, if you have a rental property, you mind your man to talk to. He will get you squared away and get you set up and get you focused on what it is you need to accomplish. But there's another Imperfect Action live stream is in the books. I appreciate everybody stopping by, checking it out. Hey, peace out. Let's make this a great day.
thanks, Rob.